So, Herb, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
I guess I want to start with what's brought you to this work around trans attraction. Like why is it you do this and where does your interest come from?
It's a funny kind of long story. But when I was working my PhD, my topic was gender role and the use of technology. And so when you're researching for gender, you start finding things, and I started seeing gender assignment, gender assignment. I'm like, you can't assign gender. What are they talking about here? And so I started that thing you do when you're trying to do research and you keep getting distracted by these other things. And so I kept going down that little rabbit hole. And then as I started getting more into, I was teaching psychology at the time, um, and then I decided that I wanted to go ahead and teach human sexuality. And as I got more into that, then that's when I found out about the whole transgender, everything that was going on with that. And yeah, so that opened up the door to me for that. And then started uh, going to drag shows here in Austin actually it was at the request of a trans man. I was at Quad S and he was telling me, he's saying, I hear you talk about your class, and everything that you talk about is things that you've read in studies and in books. And he challenged me. He said, when have you ever been to a gay club? And at the time I said, well, never. He goes, when have you ever talked to a trans person? I said, well, does the present company count? And he goes, you need to go out and meet people where they are. And
Mm,
so that's what got me into doing that. I also have a radio television background, so at the time I would record some of the drag shows, and people kept asking me for copies of the tapes, and that led to a long, I guess, a lifelong connection with the drag community here, and a lot of the drag community are also trans, and so that's where the connection first got started.
I was going to ask about the overlap with the drag and trans cuz I guess in my head I wasn't thinking there'd be that big of an overlap, but there is.
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, that's one of the things. I think RuPaul's Drag Race didn't in the early stages have many people who were trans on the show. And then one of my friends actually, Pheromone, well, actually two of my friends, Pheromone and Christina, I forgot her last name, made the show, and so they're both trans, and they're both on the show, and so yeah, a lot of people don't realize that, and also a lot of times people they may not have started out that way, or they've been struggling their whole life, and then
Mhm.
they after being in the community and meeting other people and talking to other people. They realize this is really what I feel like. This is really where I think I belong, and also that sense of freedom that even other drag performers feel when they're performing, when they're in costume, and I like to say in uniform, um, that sense of freedom, that sense of completeness that they feel, they realize I only feel this when I'm in uniform, and that's kind of goes down that road.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're talking about trans attraction, are you specifically talking about men who are attracted to trans women, or uh, I don't know? Is that your area of specialty and interest, or are you talking more broadly than that?
So, I like to say, I'm Dr. Coleman, and I am trans attracted, trans amorous. What that means is that I find myself that I can be attracted to trans women and some trans men also. That's kind of a newer thing for a lot of people. Um, and But just like other attractions, it's not a solo attraction. Still, definitely attracted to cis women. I mean, actually, it's a femme attraction. So to all expressions of femininity, and even now expressions of either androgyny or non-binary kind of goes in that. So I guess that puts me in the pan community area kind of thing
Right.
like that.
Right. Right. Right.
And by the way, I'm not the only one. If you've heard of A Billion Wicked Thoughts and seen some of the research on that, some of the top researches on many of the porn sites, number two and three at least are always for trans or some of the other slang terms used.
Okay. So how has this attraction been viewed, like historically? What's changed about it over time?
So one of the things is the reason I can talk about this is because I'm a sex educator and I'm given a pass for a lot of stuff.
Mm,
So like going to gay clubs, people not questioning me as much. Um, but in the past, anytime somebody tries to talk about this or tries to mention it, first of all, most people don't. Um, it's assumed that you're gay. he's like, well, you're obviously gay because you're attracted to, whatever. But it's like, no, think about that initial attraction. What brought you in there? 9 times out of 10, you thought this was a cis woman,
Mm.
and that's what the attraction was. And then when you find out differently, so many people, and this happens on what the TV show Friends, deny the attraction. So like, no, 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 you were attracted. Now that you found out that there's more to the story, you're going to change your attraction, but you can't deny that you were initially attracted, and not necessarily just to um, the beauty and whatever. I think that whenever we're attracted, there's also something else about the person that we're attracted to.
Yeah. And so is this more it seems like the trans experience is more public and visible now. So I would imagine trans attraction is as well. I mean,
Totally invisible. I got the disappointing news that my panel was not accepted for South by, but that's what it was one of the part of the title was the unseen or unheard part of the LGBT community. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of because even the trans community in many ways don't accept us. They call us chasers, and they have other things because a lot of, I mean, let's be honest, most men come to this through porn.
hmm,
So that's their first experience with anybody trans, unless they have somebody in their life. When I talk to my students about this, a lot of times, I said, well, now since Caitlyn Jenner, everybody has a reference point, but that's not really the only reference point, and that's not really necessarily the best reference point. And then that at least that opens up a conversation that as people start talking about it. But yeah, it's viewed very negatively by a lot of people. Even people themselves find themselves to have a lot of self doubt, self hatred that goes on within there, and so there's a lot of trans misogynoir that occurs because of that, and unfortunately, those are also some of the same people who end up, unaliving trans people because their conflictedness that they're still struggling with, and what that means for them.
yeah, I was wondering, well, like, what are the biggest challenges for trans attracted people? And some
One,
of
just
it must be
mentioning
that right conflicted feelings about this, right? Or what does it mean?
well, so that first question that people always ask themselves, does this mean that I'm gay also? And so it begins, down the road. That luckily, being in the field, I was at a conference. There was the Gender Education Federation group had a thing here, and so we were talking about it at lunch. And they said, no, you're attracted to at the time. I think the term what they used for me was gyno attracted. Like you're attracted to female presentation. And so that's the first thing. Because yes, here's the thing: I am not attracted to men. I tell my students, I'm sorry, I'm going to break your hearts, but I don't think Tandem Tatum is all that. I'm sorry, it just doesn't do anything for me. Neither did Burt Reynolds. Neither do a lot of the people who were out there. Now, Jay Davidson, who was in the Crying Game, a little bit, But so yeah, it's definitely the fem aspect that I find attractive, and
Hmm.
so that's definitely different than just being gay or bi.
Right.
And so and that's the thing is that most people don't have the opportunity or haven't thought that deeply about it to kind of parse things out that way. And so there's this internal struggle, and certainly there's the external pressures that go along with that.
Yeah. You mentioned the crying game. I'm curious, like, what role media, movies, TV have played in awareness of this or of understanding it, um, making it
But
visible. I
and that's
remember that
what
everybody
that's
kept that secret, right, with the crying
yeah,
game. So,
that's what my panel was going to be about, was addressing that because Baby Reindeer just won an Emmy, and so and there was another movie, American Anthem, that came out this summer. And so I thought, okay, these will be some very good ones that kind of help broaden the conversation. So anytime I think media does a nice job, or at least tries to explore some of it, it brings up some of the topics there. Um, and then just recently, I think one of the cable shows replayed A Soldier's Girl, and there's a great scene from A Soldier's Girl when she's performing on stage and he's walking into the club, and they've already met before, and so they kind of are established they have an attraction for each other, and the way that she's performing, the consequences of falling as he's walking in, it is like the most romantic scene in television history or movie history as far as I'm concerned.
I
But
haven't
yeah,
seen this. I'll have to have to look that
it
up
is.
then.
Oh, Soldier's Girl is kind of hard to watch because of the outcome, but
Okay.
if you if you watch the interaction that goes on, it kind of explains how this develops. Basically, the same way any attraction does. But then you have to be able to parse out. And you think about this was a based on a true story that occurred in the '90s. I believe it was the '90s, might have been '80s. And the fact that he's a soldier, has that was a major impact on what he was allowed to how he had to look at his relationships and the pushback that he got for people just even thinking that he was. And so
Right.
yeah, that's part of the issue that a lot of people experience is either their jobs or their family, their friends, all that are all probably view it as negatively, or they're afraid to find out.
Right.
And one of the interesting things, I've met several people who are now speaking out and talking about this and trying to share our experiences. Um, One gentleman did actually lose a job because of it, and so
Mm.
yeah, it's not a protected class. So
Right. Right.
that becomes a very, and some other aspects that kind of go along with that.
Right. Now you mentioned most people's first exposure is porn, and that the trans community might call people chasers. I guess I'm wondering, like, where's the line between like fetishizing this versus an attraction? Like, it seems like it must get a little muddy, right? People, where is this trans attraction welcome versus seen as a chaser? Like, what are the the nuances here? I guess about this.
Well, and I think it goes along with any attraction. We talked about this at ASEC. I forgot what session we were in, and I actually brought it up in the audience. When I say that I'm attracted to someone, there's the aesthetic aspect. So like I find redheads attractive, okay? So there's an aesthetic to redheads. I don't fetishize it and say, oh, because redheads are hot, or because they're bold tempered, or because of I don't add other characteristics to that. It is the what I'm seeing with the presentation. Sometimes red hair and green eyes, red hair and brown eyes, red hair and blue eyes. Just kind of look at the freckles. There's all kinds of things that you might find attractive about it. And then as long as you don't add on to these other qualities that may or may not be there. In terms of chasers, chasers are people who are just pretty much wanting the sex and or wanting to explore the sex,
Mm.
and not really want to have relationships, or like they say, will you take them out to dinner and those kinds of things. So that's one of the ways in which we try to draw the lines. But once again, other people will say, just the fact that you're saying that if you're attracted to me because I'm trans, then that in itself makes you a chaser. And so there's some discussion that needs to happen along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. I would imagine there's some element of being trans as part of the attraction. Like there's a visual, like you said, I see a woman, I imagine she's a cis woman. At first, I'm just attracted to the femme qualities. But for certain people, um, once they understand the whole person, right, they're less maybe sexually interested than they were if it was a cis person, right?
Right.
So there may be something about being trans specifically that would be attractive.
So one of the things that I like to say or discuss is that the thing that really made me interested in it and almost made me want to change my dissertation topic, because I kept thinking, well, okay, I'm looking at gender role. Well, how does gender role play out when you transition? Do you still maintain the same gender role, or does that shift? And all the people who I've talked to have said that, no, there is actually a shift in the way
Mm.
that they kind of see some of that. Um, but as you when you look at it that way, I'm just lost my train of thought on that one. Um, Ask the question again, and I'll go back to it.
Well, I guess I'm wondering about is there something that's attractive specifically about somebody being trans, not
Right. So
just
that's where I was going with it.
presenting?
For most of us, gender is something that we're born with, that we don't really think about much. We established early on. In America, we are constantly fighting about what it means to be a man. So
Mm.
that's one thing that we do. But we don't doubt our maleness. We just doubt how butch or macho we are, or whatever kind of thing, or masculine or we are, how those kinds of things apply. So when you have somebody who's actually thought about and gone through and made conscious decisions about how they're going to live their lives, there's a difference in the way in which they move through the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if I necessarily pick up on that per se, but there's some kind of energy that I kind of feel. I have one of my good friends who I met at a club, and one of the first things I said is that I really am vibing on your energy here. And it was the way she was dancing around, the way she was greeting people, the way she was just being, she was being very flirtatious as well. I'll just put it out there. Um, and her response was, and energy is very important, isn't it? And I
Hmm.
said, yes, it really is. And then, okay, if I get too much into the weeds here or too much true confessions here, one of the things that made me kind of realize, I was just out there, shooting videos of the drag shows, learning about the community, meeting people and things. Um, and I was at the club one time and I was talking to this one person and I realized I'm getting very turned on. Like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? And so I went home that night and like, dang her, what's going on here? You know who they are, you've actually seen them, outside of the uniform. But yet when they're in uniform, you are finding yourself being very, like I said, literally aroused.
Hmm.
And so that kind of made me kind of think about it and kind of talk to people and say, okay, so what does this mean? And then they said very simply, you're attracted. What do you think it means?
Right.
So
But you even for yourself had some of those questions. What does this mean? What are the implications of this attraction? Right.
yeah. So here's the thing: that somebody who, well, one, if you have somebody in your life who transitions, you too go through a sense of transition in terms of how you relate to them, and if you knew them before, knew them after. When you first come to this community or first become aware, you yourself go through some slight transition, some. I don't want to equate it, so I'll just say some sense of change in the way in which you view and operate, and once again, what decisions you're going to make about that. And
Hmm.
like I never had, I was never shy or never reticent about, going to lunch with somebody or meeting people, places, giving people rides home and those kinds of things. In fact, some of my first interactions were through Planned Parenthood. It was the funniest thing on Gay Pride Day. We had a table set up. When I was Planned Parenthood. I was right next to TENT, the Trans Education Network of Texas, and so we were just right there. And I had my psychology textbook out, and I think it was my human sexuality textbook. And so the person who was minding the booth next to me saw it, and they said, "Hey!" And so we struck up a conversation, started talking, and so yeah, that's how you kind of you make those connections in those various ways.
Yeah. So, what kind of conversations, create a supportive and accepting climate, for the trans community and their partners, the people that are attracted to them? Like,
That's what we're
how do we
working on
make this
right
a
now.
welcoming,
That's the thing.
environment?
We're trying to work on that right now because there isn't. I mean, so here's the thing: if you go to clubs where there's drag performances, or even just any gay clubs in general, and actually even now just some straight clubs, and you meet people and talk to people. Um, some people are very open out about who they are, and others less so. So as you begin to have those conversations in there, if you're in a gay club, there's a lot more acceptance, a lot more less questioning as you go through there. And once again, depending on your behavior and all that good stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the first place of quote acceptance as part of the larger community per se. But for trans amorous or trans attracted specifically, there's very little. So there is a gentleman, Perry, who has a site called Trans Amorous, and he's a life coach, and he does a lot of counseling with both trans women and trans men, as well as people who are attracted to them, and helping them to explore some of the things. And he talks about some of the issues that go along. So some of the things that you had before were because most people are stealth or on the down low with this kind of thing. There have been people who've had relationships with them, and that person wants to them out them to their family or
Mm.
those kinds of things when things go bad. So that we talked about some of that aspect of it, and we also help people just kind of parse through just everything that goes along with it. And the sad part is because of the state of our society, like I said, because it's not a protected class, employment wise, there are people who definitely have to be careful. I'm sitting here in the state capitol, and so I know. And what's interesting is, unfortunately, a lot of people who you meet in the clubs are also sex workers, and so because of what I teach, they are open to have conversations with me all the time about things. And several have shared with me, you won't believe who some of my clients are. you know,
Mm.
yeah, and not just legislatures and famous athletes, college athletes, and so one of the interesting things was Dennis Quaid was at one of the clubs with us, and he was surrounded by people, obviously. And so, yeah, we see that, kind of thing happening all the time. But yeah, to broaden it out, that's one of the goals that we have right now. I've met somebody a couple of months ago, and we're working on. Well, she started the whole project. Is that she wants to go and make the space more open and to kind of squash the chaser dialogue, or at least clearly identify who is and who isn't, and then to try to have the community be more open, and also to kind of reduce the transactionness of the sex worker aspect of it, and to kind of have people have true authentic relationships, and to be able to create a space where that can occur and grow, and hopefully make that more the case here. I think things like baby reindeer can be a big help with that. And our American Anthem was great. Don't get me wrong. I think it's not going to work for a lot of people. I mean, I loved it. It's great. It's a community based movie. It's community inclusive. With those outside the community, I can see where they're going to have issues. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, somebody's not alone if they're having attraction, right? Like this trans attracted, trans amorous person. Like, what do you think the takeaway is you want somebody to hear if they're listening to this and they felt conflicted or ashamed or at least, closeted or hidden around this?
Well, first of all, one, you don't necessarily have to feel ashamed or whatever. Well, explore what it means for you. I mean, be honest. If it's just if the sex aspect is what you're really curious about, if that's what goes with it. And in fact, I remember having this conversation um, early on. I said, I don't know if my attraction to the trans women who I'm attracted to is any different than my attraction to the stars I'm attracted to. I don't really know them. Not haven't had relationships with them. So is it just something that I'm fantasizing about, or that's in my head, or is there something real? And when you start meeting people and then start, having lunches and dinners and going out and getting in relationships, then you start realizing, okay, no, this is me and another person. This is
Mm-hmm.
this is me and Susie, and I like Susie. Susie likes me, and regardless of what Susie comes with or whatever, we're just you know two people who are enjoying each other's company.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And where can people reach out? Like what do you have available or what's if they're curious or want to learn more?
So the Trans Amherst Network, I think, is probably one of the best places to start because you can get a lot of information, and you can have conversations and dialogue. It's not going to cost you anything, um, and then the House of Abundance, who I'm working with right now, as she's starting to grow her operation too. As it grows, there'll probably be more. So there's a Facebook group out there. I don't have my Facebook up right now, but if I can bring it up, I can bring up what the name of her group. And so those are some places to start with. But the bigger thing I would say is to put yourself in community.
Mm.
If you're not in, well, first of all, the harder part for any of this, and so we just, we were talking about this in the class, and one of the questions that they had on their quiz was about people who've come out to their families, and so the research shows that people who come out to their families and it was safe. I need to qualify for that.
Yes.
Have higher levels of acceptance, higher levels, lower levels of alcohol abuse, and all that good stuff. Um, so deciding first of all where you think it might be safe to have the conversations, and then do that. What I do with my students all the time is I said, you guys have the perfect out. You can talk about anything sex related you want without outing yourself, because all you have to say is, I took human sexuality, and one of the things we talked about was
Right,
boom.
right.
So, I would throw it out to anybody else to say, they had this movie, Baby Reindeer, and it won an Emmy, and it's about this guy who was, trans attractive, but he was also stalked by this other woman. Um, so, what do you think about that? Do you think that trans attracted guys are just gay, or is it something? Is it, how do you feel about that? And kind of explore to see where people are on some of those kinds of things.
Right. Right.
And of course, right now, I think what is it? There's a state, the guy running from governor in North Carolina, is that right? Who has been outed that he's been going to these websites and he's been commenting and saying things about trans people. Obviously, but then he's publicly denouncing them.
Right.
So there's a huge question there. That's another great conversation starter. Kind of see where people are on this. And then if you find a safe space, you can then begin starting to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, certainly. Thank you for the invite, and I look forward to more conversations and seeing how this goes.